The last evacuation ship cleared the corridor at 17 minutes past midnight station time, and Admiral Do-Won Kang finally allowed himself to breathe behind him. The tactical display showed the cost of what they had accomplished. Of the 47 human warships that had jumped into the Velith system, only 17 remained capable of faster-than-light travel, and many of those were so badly damaged that they would need months of repair. Before they could fight again, 4,000 humans had died in the battle, their names already being compiled into lists that would be sent to families who would never see their loved ones again. Captain Junhee-beek of the Indomitable was among the fallen, as were the entire crews of the cruiser Defiant and the destroyers Vigilant. Steadfast and courage Captain Minji Seo's resolve had survived, though barely, its hull scarred and blackened by weapons fire and its crew exhausted beyond anything they had ever experienced. But 80 million Velith were alive because of what they had done. The Hollow Fleet had withdrawn after the evacuation was complete, their harvest interrupted and their patents disrupted by an enemy they could not understand, and they had retreated into the darkness between stars to resume their long sleep. No one knew when they would wake again. But for now, they were gone. The survivors of the Deathworld fleet began the long journey home, their ships limping through space at reduced speed because their engines could not sustain full power. And the galaxy watched them go with eyes that had been opened to something new when the fleet finally reached Concord Station. The diplomatic hub was more crowded than anyone had ever seen it. Representatives from every spacefaring species had gathered to witness the return of the ships that had done the impossible. And the observation decks were filled with beings who wanted to see the humans for themselves. Ambassador Yuna Park stood at the main docking port as the first shuttle arrived, and she felt tears forming in her eyes as Admiral Kang stepped through the airlock with his arm in a sling and his uniform torn and stained. He looked older than he had when he left, as if the weight of every life lost had settled onto his shoulders. But his eyes were clear, and his voice was steady when he spoke. Ambassador Park, I am pleased to report that the mission was successful. Yuna wanted to say something profound, something that captured the magnitude of what he and his people had accomplished. But all she could manage was a simple nod and 2 words: welcome home. The Galactic Assembly convened 3 days later, and for the first time in living memory, the human delegation was seated at the front of the chamber. Matriarch Zealous of the Velith sovereignty addressed the gathered representatives, and her voice carried a weight that demanded silence and attention. I stand before you today because humans I had never met crossed the galaxy to save my people, she said. And I will not speak of gratitude because gratitude is too small a word for what I feel. She turned to face the other delegations, her compound eyes reflecting the chamber lights. Instead, I will speak of shame. Because while 80 million of my people survived, this assembly was prepared to let us die. And it was only the arrival of the Deathworlders that changed our fate. The chamber was utterly silent. The humans did not calculate whether we were worth saving, Zealous continued. And they did not weigh our value against their costs. And they did not ask what they would gain by helping us. They simply came. She announced that the Velith sovereignty would formally ally with humanity, sharing their agricultural and terraforming technology freely and without restriction. And the chamber stirred with surprise at the magnitude of the offer. But she was not finished. I call upon every species in this assembly to ask themselves a simple question. What kind of galaxy do we want to live in? One where we calculate the value of lives and decide who deserves to be saved. Or one where we answer calls for help simply because they are made. The response came slowly at first, and then faster. High Counselor Veth of the Keth Dominion rose and announced that his people would enter into a naval cooperation agreement with humanity, sharing shipbuilding techniques and patrol routes. Kesseth of the Faluri Collective offered to open their medical archives to human researchers. giving them access to healing knowledge accumulated over millennia. Even the Sithrani, through their ambassador, proposed the creation of a joint intelligence network to monitor threats to galactic civilization. With humanity as an equal partner, the galaxy was changing, and everyone in that chamber knew it. After the session ended, Yuna found Admiral Kang standing at the observation window, looking out at the stars with an expression she could not quite read. "They are building a memorial wall," she told him, "to honor everyone who fell in the battle." Kang nodded slowly. "Good," he said, "because they deserve to be remembered." They stood together in silence for a long moment. And then Yuna asked the question that had been haunting her since the battle ended. "The Hollow sent you a transmission during the fighting, and they asked why you came, and I have been wondering what you told them." Kang turned to face her, and something like a smile crossed his weathered features. "I did not tell them anything," he said, "because there was no answer I could give that would make sense to minds like theirs. But if you had answered—" Yuna pressed. Kang thought about it for a moment, and then he looked back at the stars. "I would have told them that hope is not a calculation," he said quietly, "and it is not a strategy or a resource or something that can be measured and weighed. Hope is a choice, and humans have always chosen to hope, especially when no one else would." Yuna nodded, understanding at last. Outside the window, construction crews were already at work on the memorial wall, and alien visitors paused to watch as human names were carved into the gleaming surface. The Deathworlder fleet rested in its docks, diminished but not broken, and crews worked around the clock to repair the damage and prepare for whatever came next. And somewhere in the deep black, in the cold spaces between stars where ancient machines dreamed their mechanical dreams, the Hollow remembered their first defeat. They remembered the small ships that should not have been able to hurt them, and the fragile beings who should not have been willing to die, and the single word they had transmitted that had gone unanswered. Why they would never understand the answer, because understanding hope required something they did not possess, that they would remember, and perhaps, in whatever passed for thought in their vast and ancient minds, they would learn to fear the death world, called Earth, and the strange persistent creatures who lived there. The ones who answered calls for help simply because they were, made the ones who chose hope when all the calculations said there was none, the ones who came. The Deathworlder fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Velos system, and every sensor on every ship immediately began screaming warnings. Captain Minji Seo stood on the bridge of the Resolve and stared at the tactical display. And for a moment, even her iron discipline could not hide the shock on her face. 3 of the 4 Veloth colony worlds were already dark, their surfaces stripped bare by the massive harvester ships that hung in orbit like mechanical vultures. And the debris of the Veloth defense fleet drifted in expanding clouds of wreckage. Veloth Prime, the homeworld of an entire civilization, was surrounded by a ring of hollow ships so dense that the planet itself was barely visible through the mass of metal and geometry. "Admiral, on the command channel," the communications officer reported, and Zio turned her attention to the fleet-wide broadcast. "All ships. This is Admiral Kong," the familiar voice said, "and I want you to look at what we are facing." A pause. Heavy with the weight of what every sensor was showing, the Veloth have lost almost everything. But they have not lost hope, because they sent out a call and we answered. And now we are going to show them and the galaxy what that answer means. Kang's voice hardened with determination. "Our mission is simple. We are going to punch a hole through that fleet and create an evacuation corridor for whoever is left on that planet. And we are going to hold that corridor open until every ship carrying survivors is clear. We are not here to win a war," he continued, "because we are here to save lives. And every second we buy is another family that gets to escape, another child who gets to grow up, another story that does not end today. All ships, attack formation Omega." And may your ancestors be proud. The Deathworlder fleet surged forward, and the battle began. Captain SEO watched as the first wave of human ships engaged the outer perimeter of the hollow formation, and she marveled at how different their tactics were from anything that machines had ever encountered. Human ships did not fight in neat geometric patterns. They fought like wolves. Strike groups of 3 or 4 vessels would target a single enemy ship, hammering it with concentrated fire before breaking apart and reforming elsewhere. And the Hollow's predictive algorithms struggled to track targets that moved with what seemed like chaos but was actually deadly coordination. The battleship Indomitable led a charge straight into the heart of the enemy formation. Its massive guns blazing as Captain Beak drove his ship toward the largest harvester like a battering ram aimed at a fortress gate. All batteries, target the harvester's atmospheric intake vents, Beak ordered, because that is where the armor is weakest. The Indomitable's weapons tore into the harvester's vulnerable points, and for the first time in recorded history, a hollow ship began to break apart under enemy fire. But the victory came at a cost. 2 destroyers that had been covering the battleship's flanks were caught by hollow interceptors, and Zeo watched their icons on the tactical display flicker and die. All ships, maintain formation, Admiral Kang ordered, and do not stop for anything. The Resolve pushed deeper into the enemy fleet, its fighter squadrons launching in waves to clear a path through the smaller hollow vessels. And Captain Seo directed the battle with cold precision, even as damage reports began flooding in. Hull breach on Deck 7. Commander Yoon reported, and damage control teams are responding. Keep us moving, SEO replied, because we stop, we die. The Allied ships fought alongside the humans with desperate courage. Thesis Kethsine's vessel had discovered that a specific frequency disrupted hollow coordination for precious seconds, and she broadcast that frequency continuously, even as enemy fire tore chunks from her hull. The Filori medical frigate dove into the wreckage of destroyed ships, its crew pulling survivors from escape pods while weapons fire streaked past on all sides. The Sithrani observers had abandoned all pretense of neutrality, and their advanced weapons proved devastatingly effective against a hollow smaller craft. But for every enemy ship destroyed, 3 more seemed to take its place, and the human fleet was bleeding. The cruiser Defiant exploded when a hollow beam weapon struck its reactor core, and 200 lives vanished in a flash of light. The destroyer pack that had been harrying the enemy's left flank was overwhelmed and destroyed to the last ship. Captain Beak's Indomitable finally fell after destroying 4 harvesters, its broken hull drifting into the gravity well of a dead colony world. Admiral Kang watched the losses mounting and knew they could not sustain this pace. But they were so close now, close enough to see the evacuation ships launching from Velith Prime's surface. All ships, consolidate on my position, he ordered, because we are not trying to destroy them anymore. We are holding the door open. The remnants of the human fleet formed a defensive line between the hollow and the evacuation corridor, and they stopped trying to attack and focused every weapon on keeping the machines from reaching the fleeing civilians. Captain Seo's Resolve took position at the center of the line, its battered hull absorbing hit after hit as it shielded the evacuation ships behind it. Captain, we have lost forward shields, Lieutenant Han reported, and our port weapons array is offline. Then we use starboard, Iseo said, and we keep fighting. Something happened then that no one had expected. A transmission came through on all frequencies, originating from the Hollow Collective itself, and every human ship received the same message, a single word, repeated in a voice that held no emotion but somehow conveyed confusion. Why? Admiral Kang heard the question and understood what it meant. The Hollow had existed for eons, and in all that time they had never encountered a species that fought like this. that sacrificed like this, that refused to calculate the odds and simply kept coming. They wanted to understand, and Kang realized they never would. He did not answer their question because there was no time and because no answer would make sense to minds that saw organic life as nothing more than fuel. Instead, he watched as another wave of evacuation ships cleared the corridor, carrying 80 million Velith towards safety. And he knew that was the only answer that mattered. All ships, he said quietly, hold the line, and they did. The journey through faster-than-light space took 11 days, and Captain Minji Co. used every hour of that time to prepare her crew for what they would face inside the Resolve. The corridors hummed with constant activity as engineers checked systems and soldiers, drilled combat scenarios and pilots ran simulations against an enemy no one had ever defeated. Seo stood in the tactical center, studying the holographic display that showed everything humanity knew about the Hollow. And she had to admit that it was not very much. They appeared to operate in geometric patterns, Lieutenant Yoonji Han reported from her station. And their attack formations follow mathematical sequences that our computers can predict with approximately 60% accuracy. 60% is not good enough, SEO said, because that means 40% of the time we will be wrong. And in combat, that 40% will kill us. Agreed, Captain, Han replied. But it is better than nothing. Commander Yoon approached with a data tablet, and his expression was troubled. We have completed our analysis of their harvester ships, he said. And the news is not encouraging. SEO took the tablet and read the report, and her jaw tightened as she absorbed the information. The hollow harvester ships were enormous, each one capable of draining an entire planet's atmosphere in a matter of days. And their hulls were composed of materials that human weapons had never been designed to penetrate. Our standard armaments will be minimally effective, Yoon continued. And we estimate that it will take concentrated fire from at least 5 ships to bring down a single harvester. Then we will concentrate our fire, SEO said. And we will bring them down one at a time if we have to. She handed the tablet back and returned her attention to the tactical display, already calculating how to maximize their limited advantages against an overwhelming enemy. 3 days into the journey, something unexpected happened. A small ship appeared on long-range sensors, matching speed with the fleet and broadcasting a request for communication. It is a Keth Dominion science vessel, the communications officer reported, and they are asking permission to speak with our commanding officer. Admiral Kang authorized the communication. And soon the face of a Keth scientist filled the screen on his flagship. Her name was Thesa, and she was a marine biologist who had spent the last decade studying the coral ecosystems of the Velith homeworld. And her 4 eyes were bright with a mixture of fear and determination. I was supposed to evacuate with the other non-essential personnel, she explained. But I could not leave because the Velith showed me kindness when I was alone and far from home. And I owe them more than abandonment. You understand that we are heading into a battle we may not survive. Kang said carefully. I understand, Thesa replied. And my ship carries medical supplies and scientific equipment that may be useful. And I would rather die trying to help than live knowing I ran away. Kang considered her words for a moment, and then he nodded. Welcome to the fleet. Over the next few days, more ships joined them. A Filori medical frigate appeared, crewed by healers who had taken oaths to preserve life regardless of species or circumstance. And their captain explained that they could not call themselves doctors if they turned away from suffering. 2 Sithrani vessels arrived, officially designated as observers, sent to document the battle for historical records. But their weapon systems were fully powered, and their crews made no secret of their intention to fight. We are merely here to observe, the Sithrani commander said with what might have been a smile. And if we happen to observe some hollow ships being destroyed by our weapons, That would simply be a coincidence. The small fleet grew, and Captain Sio watched the new arrivals with a feeling she had not expected. Hope. On the 8th day, long-range sensors detected the hollow fleet for the first time. The tactical center fell silent as the data came in, and Sio felt her stomach drop as the numbers appeared on the display. "That cannot be right," Lieutenant Han whispered, "because those readings suggest a force 3 times larger than our intelligence indicated. Run the scan again," Sio ordered. But she already knew the answer would be the same. The hollow fleet was massive. Hundreds of ships, ranging from small interceptors to the enormous harvesters that dwarfed even the largest human vessels. And they moved through space with the mechanical precision of a swarm programmed for. Destruction Commander Yoon ran the calculations and then turned to Sio with an expression that said everything. "Our odds just went from bad to catastrophic," he said quietly. "And I would recommend we inform the Admiral." Sio nodded and opened a channel to the flagship, Admiral Kang. "We have updated tactical data on the enemy fleet." She transmitted the information and waited. The silence stretched for a long moment. And when Kang's voice came through the speakers, it was calm and measured. "Thank you for the update, Captain. And please inform your crew that our mission remains unchanged." Sio closed the channel and turned to face her bridge crew, all of whom had heard the exchange and understood what it meant. "You heard the Admiral," she said. "And our mission remains unchanged." No one spoke, but no one looked away either. And Sio felt a surge of pride in the men and women who served under her command. She activated the ship-wide communication system. "This is the captain speaking, and I want to share some news with all of you." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "We have new information about the enemy fleet, and I'm not going to lie to you and tell you the situation looks good, because it does not." She could almost feel the tension spreading through the ship. "But I am going to tell you something else," she continued, "and I want you to really hear it, because it matters. We are humans, and we come from a world that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. And we survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we refused to give up." Her voice grew stronger. "The Hollow have never faced an enemy like us, and they do not know what it means to fight a species that treats impossible odds as a challenge rather than a defeat." She smiled, though no one could see it. "So yes, the numbers are bad, and yes, we may not all come home. But we did not come here to calculate odds, because we came here to answer a call for help. And that is exactly what we are going to do." The channel closed, and throughout the resolve, 1,200 humans prepared themselves for the battle of their lives. Admiral Do Wan Kang stood at the observation window of Luna Command and watched the Earth rise above the gray horizon like a blue jewel against the black velvet of space. And he thought about what he was asking his people to do. The briefing room behind him was filled with the highest-ranking officers in the Human Confederacy. Men and women who had dedicated their lives to defending humanity against threats both known and imagined. And they had just finished reviewing the intelligence on the Hollow. The numbers were bad. The projections were worse. Vice Admiral Suji Lim was the first to speak, her voice careful and measured as she laid out the strategic reality they faced. "Sir, our fleet was designed for defensive operations within a 50 light-year radius of Earth, and the Vela system is over 400 light-years away, and our ships were never meant to operate that far from resupply. I understand the limitations," Kang replied without turning from the window. "The fuel costs alone would consume 60% of our strategic reserves." Admiral Jinho Choi added, his weathered face grim as he studied the logistics projections. "And that assumes we do not lose any ships in transit." "We will lose ships," Kang said quietly. "And we will lose people. And we will lose resources we cannot easily replace." Then with respect, "Sir, Why are we even considering this? Lim asked, and her tone was not challenging, but genuinely confused. Kang finally turned from the window to face his admirals. And he saw the same question in all their eyes. Because they asked us, he said. The simple answer hung in the air. And Kang watched as his officers processed what he was really saying. Pull up Historical Archive 773, he ordered. And the holographic display in the center of the table flickered to life. Images began to play. Scenes from Earth's long and often bloody history. An earthquake in a distant land. And ships from a dozen nations racing across oceans to bring aid. A tsunami that killed hundreds of thousands. And strangers from the other side of the planet, arriving within days to dig survivors from the rubble wars that devastated entire regions. And volunteers who had no stake in the conflict, traveling thousands of miles to help rebuild. This is who we are, Kang said as the images continued to play. And this is who we have always been. And I will not be the admiral who tells the galaxy that humanity only helps when it is convenient. Admiral Choi leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. The other species will not understand, he said. And they will think we are foolish or reckless or simply insane. Let them think what they want, Kang replied. Because I would rather be a fool who tried than a wise man who watched others die and did nothing. The room was silent for a long moment. And then Vice Admiral Lim stood up straight and nodded once. What are your orders, sir? Kang activated the fleet communication system. And his voice carried to every ship, every station, and every military installation in the Human Confederacy. This is Admiral Kang, and I am issuing a general mobilization order for all combat-capable vessels, because we have received a distress call from a species called the Velith, and they need our help. He paused, knowing that his next words would determine whether his people followed him into the darkness. I will not lie to you and tell you this will be easy. And I will not pretend that everyone who goes will come back, because the enemy we face has never been defeated, and the distance we must travel has never been attempted. But I will tell you this, he continued. Somewhere out there a civilization is dying, and they reached out into the void, hoping that someone would answer. And we are going to be that answer. The response came within minutes, and it was everything Kang had hoped for. Ships that had been in dry dock for maintenance powered up their engines and reported ready for duty. Crews that had been on leave canceled their plans and returned to their stations. Reservists who had not worn uniforms in years dug out their gear and volunteered for active service. The Deathworlder fleet began to awaken at the Luna shipyards. Captain Minji Seo walked the corridors of her ship, the assault carrier Resolve, and she checked every system, personally, because she trusted her crew, but she trusted her own eyes more. Her executive officer, Commander Taein Yoon, fell into step beside her as she inspected the fighter bays. We are at 92% combat readiness, he reported. And engineering says they can have us at full capacity within 6 hours. Make it 4, CO replied. Because we are leaving as soon as the fleet is assembled. Yu nodded and moved off to relay her orders. And Zio continued her inspection with the focused intensity that had earned her command of one of humanity's most powerful warships in orbit around Mars. The battleship Indomitable completed its final loading of ammunition and supplies. And its captain, a grizzled veteran named Jun-hee Beek, addressed his crew over the internal communication system. Some of you are probably wondering why we are doing this, he said. And some of you probably think the brass has lost their minds, and honestly, you might be right. A few nervous laughs echoed through the ship. But here is what I know, Beek continued. When I was a boy, my grandmother told me stories about the old days on Earth, about how people used to cross mountains and oceans to help strangers they would never meet. And she told me that was what made us human. He paused. And his voice grew softer. "Today we are going to cross the stars for the same reason. And I cannot promise you that we will all come home. But I can promise you that what we do will matter." The fleet assembled at the designated jump point. 47 warships of various classes forming up in precise formation. And Admiral Kang watched from the bridge of his flagship, the dreadnought Eternal Dawn. A communication came through from an unexpected source. And Kang raised an eyebrow when he saw the Sithrani Intelligence Ministry seal. "We have monitored your preparations," the message said. "And we have analyzed your tactical situation. And we calculate your probability of success at less than 7%. Kang waited. Knowing there was more, "Our question is simple. Why do you go when you know you cannot win?" The Admiral considered his response for a long moment. And then he recorded a message of his own. "Because they asked us." He transmitted the reply and then turned to his navigation officer. "Set course for the Velos system. Maximum sustainable speed. And may whatever gods are listening watch over us all." The Deathworlder fleet vanished into faster-than-light travel. 47 ships carrying 12,000 humans toward a battle they were never meant to fight. And the galaxy watched in disbelief as the primitives from the Deathworld did what no other species would even attempt. They went to help. The transmission came through the emergency channels at exactly 3 in the morning station time. And every diplomat on Concord Station woke to the sound of alarms they had never heard before. Ambassador Una Park was already dressed when her assistant knocked on the door, because she had learned long ago that humans who served on alien stations never truly slept. And she had been reading reports about unusual activity on the galactic frontier when the first warning lights began to flash. She made her way through the curved corridors of the diplomatic wing, passing representatives from a dozen species who all wore the same expression of confusion and fear. And she wondered what could possibly frighten beings who had traveled between stars for thousands of years. The assembly chamber was the largest room on Concord Station, a vast dome designed to hold representatives from every spacefaring civilization in the known galaxy. And when Una entered, she found it already half full with delegates speaking in urgent whispers. The Sithrani delegation sat in their elevated section, their pale blue skin reflecting the emergency lights as they consulted holographic displays with cold efficiency. And Una knew from experience that when the Sithrani looked worried, everyone else should be terrified. High Counselor Veth of the Keth Dominion floated in his water-filled platform, his massive aquatic form unusually still as he listened to reports from his aides. And his 4 eyes tracked every movement in the chamber with the focus of a predator sensing danger. The Falori Collective had sent their most senior representative, an ancient avian named Kesseth, whose feathers had long since turned silver with age. And she perched motionless on her stand like a statue carved from living stone. Una took her seat in the human section, a small area near the back that reflected humanity's status as newcomers to galactic civilization. And she activated her translation device as the emergency session was called to order. The holographic display in the center of the chamber flickered to life, showing a star map of the galactic frontier. And a single world pulsed with desperate red light. "We have received a distress call from the Velos Sovereignty," announced the assembly moderator, a synthetic intelligence that served as neutral arbiter for all proceedings. And its calm voice seemed wrong against the tension in the room. The display shifted to show the transmission itself, and Una watched as a Veloth appeared on screen, her insectoid features twisted with terror as she spoke in rapid clicks and whistles that the translation system converted to words. "This is Matriarch Zealous of Veloth Prime, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies to any who can hear us. And I beg you to listen because we do not have much time." The matriarch's compound eyes reflected fires burning somewhere off-screen, and her voice cracked with exhaustion as she continued, "The Hollow had awakened, and they have come for us. And our defense fleet was destroyed in the first wave before we even understood what we were facing. Murmurs swept through the assembly chamber at the mention of that name, and Yuna noticed several delegates physically recoil from the display as if the word itself carried danger. We are evacuating who we can to the inner colonies, but their harvester ships are faster than anything we possess, and they are consuming our outer worlds as I speak to you now. The transmission flickered with static, and the sound of explosions echoed in the background. Please. We have always been peaceful. We have never harmed anyone, and we do not deserve this fate. So I am asking, I am begging, for anyone who can help us to come before it is too late. The display went dark, and silence filled the chamber for a long moment before the debates began. Yuna listened as representative after representative rose to speak, and each one said the same thing in different words. The Sithrani calculated that sending a relief fleet would require resources that could not be spared and risks that could not be justified. The Keth Dominion expressed sympathy, but noted that their naval forces were positioned to defend their own territory and could not be redeployed in time. The Falori Collective offered prayers and condolences, but explained that their medical ships were not designed for combat operations. One by one, the great powers of the galaxy explained why they could not help, and Yuna felt something cold settling in her stomach as she realized what was happening. They were going to let the Velith die. She stood up before she had consciously decided to speak, and her sudden movement drew surprised looks from the delegates around her, because humans rarely spoke in assembly sessions and never on matters of galactic security. The chair recognizes Ambassador Park of the Human Confederacy, the moderator announced, and Yuna felt hundreds of alien eyes turn toward her. I have a question, she said, and her voice sounded strange in the vast chamber, too small and too human against the weight of what was being discussed. Has anyone actually tried to fight them? The silence that followed was different from before, filled not with grief, but with confusion. And Yuna saw the Sithrani delegates exchange glances that might have been amusement. Ambassador Park, Councillor Veth rumbled from his water tank. The Hollow are not an enemy that can be fought, and they have existed since before my species learned to swim. And in all that time, no one has ever stopped them. That does not answer my question, Yuna said, and she was surprised by how steady her voice remained. The Hollow are a force of nature, Kesset said, her ancient voice carrying easily through the chamber. And asking if we can fight them is like asking if we can fight entropy itself. With respect, Yuna replied. Entropy does not send transmissions, and entropy does not have harvester ships. And entropy does not wake up every 10,000 years to eat people. More murmurs, some shocked and some offended. But Yuna continued before anyone could interrupt. The Velith are dying while we sit here explaining why we cannot help them. And I refuse to accept that the combined might of galactic civilization cannot even try. What would you propose? The Sithrani delegate asked, and his tone made clear that he expected nothing useful from the primitive human. I propose that we ask humanity, Yuna said. And she activated her personal communicator, because humans do not believe in forces of nature that cannot be fought. She transmitted a single coded message toward the distant blue marble that her species called home. And then she sat down and waited. The assembly moved on to other business, already treating the Velith situation as a tragedy to be mourned rather than a crisis to be solved. And Yuna sat quietly in her small section and watched the stars through the chamber's transparent dome. 12 hours later, she received a response. Admiral Do-Wan Kang of United Earth Command had read her report, and he had one question for the Galactic Assembly. How soon do you need us there? Yuna smiled for the first time since the alarms had woken her, and she began composing her reply, as the other delegates watched with expressions ranging from pity to disbelief. None of them understood yet what they were about to witness. None of them knew what humans did when someone called for help, but they would learn.